Why was it a lot?
I did it twice.
Oh, why'd you do it twice?
I did it before you explained, and then I did it.
Okay. Well, you remember I said don't worry about it. Like, we're going to go over it. But some of the stuff was, you guys did cover some of the stuff in Algebra 2. Now, in this example, it's basically asking you to add, subtract, and multiply. Do you really care for each one, or it really doesn't matter? If I was going to do f plus g of x, f minus g of x, and f times g of x. Now, we have two functions. We have the square root function and we have the sine function. Are those anything like terms? Or do you have like x squared and x squareds, or x and x's, or 5? No. So guess what? I can't combine them. So as far as adding, subtracting, multiplying, it's pretty easy. There's nothing really I can do. I can just multiply the numbers, and that's about it. Right? There's nothing you can do to it. It's like multiplying. It's like doing the same with 5 and x. You can't add 5 and x. You just do 5 plus x. You can't multiply 5 times x and get something. It's just 5x, 5 times x, right? This is the same thing. These are just totally two different types of functions. I can't do anything. So I just say I'm adding them, subtracting them, and multiply them. But the domain, I'm sure, is probably the more difficult part. Now, we haven't talked anything about domain for sine at all. So what I was expecting you guys to do was to go back to page 100 and take a look at what the graph was for sine of x. If you guys remember on page 100, sine of x looks like this. So this graph continues indefinitely going like that. Is there any discontinuities or any numbers that you can see that the graph would not be a part of for x? No. So the domain for sine is all real numbers. But let's look at, what about radical square root of x? If you guys remember, that graph looks like this. The square root of x is only positive numbers, which again reminds us that when you're talking about the domain of the square root of a number, x has to be greater than or equal to 0. So I'm using the graph to visually show you the only x values that are part of this domain are greater than 0. All the x values are equal here. However, if I'm adding and subtracting and multiplying the equations, my x value, I have to plug into both equations, right? If I said x is 5, I'm plugging x in there, and I'm plugging in x in there, right? 5 works for both of them, correct? They always work for sine. It doesn't matter what I plug in for sine. But what if I did -1? Can I plug -1 in for sine?
Sure.
Yeah, -1's like over here. It's like there. But I can't plug -1 in for here. So the domain for all of these is going to be 0, infinity. And you're going to have a lot of repetition in a lot of these problems. But there will be some differences. It's not always repetition. It's not always the same, especially once you get into division and so forth.